back to Ghost Pirate Entertainment. I'm your host, Kanan Becker, and today we talk about my 10 favorite horror movies of all time. So before we get into this, just remember, this is my list. It doesn't mean these are what I think are the best horror movies of all time, but my favorite, like my personal favorites. And trust me, this was very, very difficult to make because there is at least 30 other movies that were interchangeable back and forth with these 10 that I picked. But I basically went with the ones that I feel like are the most rewatchable for me, the ones that, especially late at night or for a certain holiday or thing like that, I have to see these ones. But once again, just keep in mind, these are not what I think are the best 10 of all time, just what my personal favorite 10 are. And with that, let's get to the list.
He's here.
Candyman, you don't have to believe.
Candyman is a 1992 supernatural horror movie, directed by Bernard Rose and based on Clive Barker's short story The Forbidden. It stars Tony Todd, Virginia Madsen, and Cassie Lemons. It's about the Candyman, a murderous soul with a hook for a hand, who is accidentally summoned to reality by a skeptic grad student who is researching the monster's myth.
Everyone knows he isn't real.
That's modern oral folklore.
Everyone. Except Helen Lyle.
This is one of the more perfect horror movies, at least in my opinion. It just has romance, it has creepiness, it's got goriness, it's beautifully shot. The art design and cinematography are fantastic. Tony Todd is just absolutely incredible in this. Gives one of the best performances of any horror icon we have ever had. And unfortunately, we just recently lost Tony Todd, but he will forever be remembered for lots of roles. But I think Candyman, at least for me, will be the one that I always remember most. But this is just a stunning horror movie that has a lot to say and yet doesn't forget to be a horror movie and still entertain. So when I was putting this list together, there was no doubt in my mind Candyman had to be on it.
Look at him!
Salem's Lot is a 1979 two-part horror miniseries, directed by Tobe Hooper and adapted from the 1975 Stephen King novel of the same name. It stars David Soul, James Mason, and Lance Kerwin. The plot's about a writer who returns to his hometown and discovers that the citizens are being turned into vampires.
Sweet dreams.
I let him in.
This is one of the most comfort food, cozy horror movies there is for me. I can't even tell you how many nights I've gone to sleep watching this movie. Some of it has to do with the era that it was shot in and the way that it looks, but just the pacing of it, the way it's designed, it's creepy, it's eerie. It definitely scared the crap out of me when I was younger. But somehow it's turned into just this movie that I just adore. I've seen it literally hundreds of times and it never gets old. It's one that I can just rewatch over and over and over and still find something that entertains me and brings joy to my little horror heart. But it also has some incredible visuals, stuff that is so creepy and timeless, and especially the way Kurt Barlow looks. He is one of the best designed vampires we've ever had. Even though we've had so many other versions of vampires ever since, to me, the way he looks is still so creepy. It's similar in a lot of ways to the look of the original Count Orloff from Nosferatu, but I think there's enough that's different about it, and the fact that it's in color and everything, just the eerie, creepy, dark nature of it, I love. So Salem's Lot is without question one of my favorite horror movies ever.
You don't want to miss this.
The Lost Boys is a 1987 supernatural horror movie. Directed by Joel Schumacher, it stars Kiefer Sutherland, Jason Patric, and Jamie Gertz. The story follows two brothers who move to a small town and discover that the area is a haven for vampires.
How are those maggots?
This to me is one of the most perfect horror movies ever made. In a lot of ways, I feel like it's the horror version of Back to the Future, where there's just nothing I would change about it. Just everything from the time period, the cast, the way the sets look, the costume design, it's absolutely timeless. And every couple years, I'll give this a rewatch. And every single time, it surprises me at just how well it holds up and how good it still looks. Everything about this, because this has got to be the coolest group of vampires, at least right up there with the near dark vampires. I mean, they just look amazing. Like I said, the costumes just are timeless. These guys could walk out here in 2025 and they would still be looked at as very cool. But then this also plays super well to the young teens, like I was at the time this came out. It's so fun. It has this Goonies element to it, and there's a lighthearted quality about this, while also not ever shying away from being a horror movie. On top of that, I had the biggest crush back in the day on Jamie Gertz. I still think she's absolutely gorgeous, but especially in this movie. But I think it's a very rare thing that can have like teen heartthrobs and yet still be badass, where adults will love it, teens will love it, and even kids. It just has something for everyone. And once again, talking about visuals, I mean, some of the scenes in this just are absolutely stunning, especially like the bridge scene with the fog, or the scene with the rice and the wine and all that stuff that goes down in their little cave hideaway thing. It's just visually stunning, as well as well written, well performed, just an absolutely incredible movie.
Everybody's a suspect!
Not scared, are you?
Scream.
Scream is a 1996 slasher horror movie, directed by Wes Craven and written by Kevin Williamson. It stars Neve Campbell, David Arquette, Courtney Cox, and Matthew Lillard. A year after the murder of her mother, a teenage girl is terrorized by a new killer who targets the girl and her friends while wearing a cloak and mask.
Do you like scary movies?
What's the point? They're all the same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act, who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
This is one of those movies that came out at the absolute perfect time for me. I was just old enough, like a young teenager, and able to go to see movies by myself with my friends. And this was one of the first horror movies that I remember going with my friends to see. And it was scary, but not overly scary. It's more of just a fun movie that was perfectly designed for teenagers. And it's one thing if you watch this now and you're younger, the mystery and all that, it does still work. But it was incredible at the time because we didn't have anything that did this meta type of stuff where it used the tropes and called all this stuff out. Stuff that we had always talked about in other horror movies, but yet you never saw a movie actually refer to those things. Or at the very least, it was really rare. It hadn't been done much. But it was also a bunch of young people that we could identify with, see ourselves in, and also some of them were in TV series and things that we were watching, especially Drew Barrymore, because she was the heartthrob. I had a huge crush on her at the time. She was the it girl. She was in all the media everywhere as like, you know, this is the star of this film. And then she goes and gets offed in the first act, and it's just like jaw-dropping, blow your mind kind of stuff. But it's exciting, and it was just an incredible theater experience, especially at the time. But this is still one that holds up to this day and has influenced countless other movies. This movie really changed the face of horror because horror was dying in a lot of ways, and this revitalized it, got teenagers excited and involved. And we saw a whole bunch of movies try to copy this and not really, you know, be able to pull it off, and at least not as well as this. And yeah, I mean, there was a couple that were okay, but for the most part, a lot of them were just pale knockoffs. So not only is this one of my favorite horror movies ever made, but it also, in my opinion, is one of the most influential we've ever seen, and without a doubt deserves a spot on this list.
I can't leave. She won't let you. God help us.
Event Horizon is a 1997 sci-fi horror movie. Directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, it stars Lawrence Fishburne, Sam Neill, and Jolie Richardson. Set in 2047, it follows a group of astronauts sent on a rescue mission after a missing spaceship, the Event Horizon, which spontaneously reappeared orbiting near Neptune.
Ship doesn't really go faster than light. What it does is it creates a dimensional gateway that allows it to jump instantaneously from one point of the universe to another light years away.
This is one of those movies that got to me as much or more than any other movie I've ever seen. There's a lot of reasons why. At the time, my head wasn't exactly clear. I was partying a lot. Not gonna say exactly what I was doing, but if you get my drift. And so that's part of why I think this movie got to me even more than it might have if I hadn't been partying a lot. But either way, this movie is so dark. It's so grim. It's gory. It's gross. It's violent. It's brutal. It's exciting. It has this really cool future tech element about it, just the way that it looks. And I've heard a lot of hate for this movie too, but I know there's a ton of us out there that love it. So it's just not for everyone. But at least for me, it's an incredible movie, one that I love rewatching. Even though every time I rewatch it, I still get a little bit of that, that residue of fear that this movie gave me way back in the day. But if any movie ever made, this has that nightmare thing so well. Like, it really does feel like a nightmare. But the cast is incredible. It's well directed. I'm not a big fan of Paul W.S. Anderson. Most of his movies just don't exactly work for me. But this one in particular, I feel like was his masterpiece. Like, he really did get this right. Unfortunately, I would love to see the director's cut. I would love to see the stuff that was cut out of this movie, because from what we've heard, it was even more vicious, even more brutal and gory and disgusting and all of the things that would be fun to see. I mean, yeah, there are a few little scenes floating around on YouTube and online, but not the full picture of what was cut from this. But I still think this really holds up, especially for a sci-fi horror movie. And if for whatever reason you've yet to see this one, it's one that I highly recommend.
Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, the night no one comes home.
Halloween 3 Season of the Witch is a 1982 sci-fi horror movie, directed by Tommy Lee Wallace and written by John Carpenter and Deborah Hill. It stars Tom Atkins, Stacey Nelkin, and Dan O'Hurley. The plot focuses on an investigation by a doctor and a woman into the activities of the mysterious evil owner of the Silver Shamrock Halloween Mask Company.
Where are they taking her?
They're taking her to the factory.
I want a mask. Can I have a mask?
Just what I had in mind for you, little buddy.
It's so cool that over the last 20 years especially, this movie has slowly gained a cult following and love, and is really becoming more and more beloved, especially for the Halloween season. Because for most of my younger life, I was always arguing and defending this movie because so many people just hated on it because it didn't have Michael Myers. And I totally get that element. But if you watch this as its own thing, as its Season of the Witch, not as a Halloween Michael Myers movie, it does have a lot of fun in it. It looks incredible. The sound design and score, and especially the earworms of the jingles, just really work so well and make this movie memorable. But on top of that, Tom Atkins is so much fun to see in this. Just the journey, the weirdness, the creativeness, the weird sci-fi elements that it has, the special effects. There's just so much entertaining, good Halloween fun in it. And it was awesome. A couple years ago, I was able to drive down to the Silver Shamrock factory, the old brick building. It's still there. A lot of it, unfortunately, has been torn down now. But last I heard, there's still a good chunk of it remaining. And the town is very proud of it and they love it. And unfortunately, they've had to tear a lot of it down because it was just literally falling down. But like I said, I know that they are trying to salvage and protect at least some of the standing structure. But I'll include some pictures here of what it looked like when I was there, and it was still mostly intact. I even got a couple pieces of the red brick that were laying on the ground that I brought with me home as a memento. But it's over in Lolita, California, which is like a 4 or 5 hour drive from me. But while I was out there, I was able to go to Ferndale and see some of the Salem's Lot locations as well. So it was just an amazing voyage to see some really famous, amazing horror locations that are super important to me. But I just love this movie so much, and no matter what, every Halloween, I have to watch this one. The Thing is a 1982 sci-fi horror movie, directed by John Carpenter and based on the 1938 John W. Campbell novella, Who Goes There? It stars Kurt Russell, Keith David, and Wilford Brimley. It tells the story of a group of American researchers in Antarctica who encounter a parasitic extraterrestrial life form.
We're not getting out of here alive.
So, I mean, what is there to say about The Thing? It is another one of those movies that I think is a perfect movie. And if I were to make my list of what I think are the best horror movies, this one might be at the top. It's what I think is just that good. But as far as what are my favorites, there's a couple above this, but this is without a doubt one of my favorites. I mean, this movie is amazing. I think Kurt Russell is one of the most badass action, horror icon final characters we've ever seen, but this is definitely John Carpenter at his best. There is so much in the writing of this. The dialogue is incredible. The way he pits the characters against each other, the anxiety, the isolation of the location on top of the situation that they're in where they can't even trust each other anymore. It's just amazingly put together. But then you got to talk about the special effects. I mean, to this day, as far as practical effects go, I don't know if anybody's ever done it better. These effects still hold up to this day. They're still terrifying, just creepy, gross, gory, and brutal. But if you know me, you know cosmic horror, Lovecraftian kind of horror is my absolute favorite thing. And so this is one of the best ever for sure to do it in that type of genre with the alien that you don't know much about, but it has these powers that you can't even quite explain or understand. It's definitely beyond our understanding, and that is just what really creeps me out. And this movie does such a good job of really putting a spotlight on that. So when I was putting this list together, this one was an absolute no-brainer.
I know this book will drive people crazy.
Let's hope so. The movie comes out next month.
In the Mouth of Madness is a 1994 supernatural horror movie. Directed and scored by John Carpenter. It stars Sam Neill, Julie Carmen, and Jorgen Prichnow. It tells the story of John Trent, an insurance investigator, who visits a small town while looking into the disappearance of a successful author, and starts to question his sanity as the lines between reality and fiction begin to blur.
Kane's writing has been known to have an effect on his readers.
I mean, this just has so much of what I love. This is another one of those movies that came out at a perfect time. I remember renting this from Hollywood Video. Unfortunately, I didn't get to see this in the theater. It's one of the things that I would love someday is to see this on the big screen. But I rented it at Hollywood Video, which was a competitor out here in California to Blockbuster Video, but basically the same thing. And I brought it home and I watched it. I just knew it was John Carpenter. I didn't care about anything else. And I just remember the experience, just feeling completely engrossed in this. One of those movies where you forget everything else around you and you're completely in it. And when it ends, there's this moment of recapturing reality and realizing, okay, that, you know what I mean? Like one of those amazing experiences. And you don't get those often, but when you get one of those where you're fully immersed into a film, it's special. And just the way this story goes, the different weirdness, the way it slowly unfolds into this creepy, bizarre, Lovecraftian story is just mind-blowing. There was just so many things that I wasn't really familiar with at the time, and the way John Carpenter blended this story together with the visuals, the weird, bizarre looking things, the stuff that just sticks with me to this day about this movie. And I was then and still am a huge fan of Sam Neill, and he is just amazing in this. This is definitely one of his best performances, especially once he completely loses his mind. His performance in this is both hilarious and horrifying at the same time. He's just magnificent at this role. But it's one of those movies that every time you see something that you feel like that's gonna stick with me, that visual, that concept, that idea, they come at you with another thing that just, mind-blowing stuff here. I loved it so much then. It has a piece of me and will always have a part of me. And it's still one of those movies, especially of John Carpenter's, that just does not get enough love and deserves a lot more than it gets.
Halloween, the night he came home.
Halloween is a 1978 slasher horror movie, directed and scored by John Carpenter. It was written by Carpenter and Deborah Hill, and stars Jamie Lee Curtis, Donald Pleasance, and PJ Soles. 15 years after murdering his sister on Halloween night, Michael Myers escapes from a mental hospital and returns to the small town of Haddonfield, Illinois to kill again.
I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up, because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
This one has all of the things for me, because it got under my skin, definitely scared me, freaked me out, especially way back when I first saw this. But then it also has that comfort food, like I was talking about earlier, that there's just a coziness about this, the time period, the way that this movie looks. It just makes me think of Halloween more than any movie out there. And a big part of that I didn't realize until later on as an adult is that this feels like a California Halloween. Because even though this is supposed to be in Illinois, it doesn't look like what it looks like in Illinois. This is definitely California, and it was shot in California. The leaves that you see, they actually brought those in. That's why there's really not a lot of leaves, but this feels like October in California, and especially Northern California where I live. But there's a great nostalgia in this, where the costumes that the kids are wearing, the way people are talking. Yeah, it's a little bit before my time, but it still has a little bit of that feel of what it felt like for me in the 80s as a kid growing up and the Halloween season. But it's also the movie that made me fall in love with Mask. I love the Michael Myers mask. I love all the different versions that have been made over the years, but there's still nothing like the 78 classic Mask. On top of that, this movie has inspired an entire subgenre of horror. Because yes, we had a couple slashers before Halloween, but nothing that had really done it on the level that Halloween took it. And then you gotta mention John Carpenter. I mean, this is the beginning for him. Yeah, he did a few things before this, but this was the movie that really put him on the map. And after this, he went on to do some of my favorite horror movies ever. I mean, there's a couple of them alone on this list, but there's even more that I didn't even include on this list that I love of his, like Prince of Darkness. I mean, there's so many amazing horror movies that he's responsible for. But then you also got to mention the performance of Jamie Lee Curtis and Donald Pleasance. They're just so iconic, so entertaining. This movie is just full of so many iconic things, and there is never a Halloween that goes by that I don't watch this movie, because it just doesn't feel like Halloween unless I watch it. So when I was compiling this list, there was no doubt in my mind that this was going to be on it. But there's one movie that I still have above it as my favorite horror movie of all time.
Now you die. Phantasm.
Phantasm is a 1979 sci-fi horror movie. Written, directed, photographed, and edited by Don Coscarelli. It stars Michael Baldwin, Reggie Bannister, and Angus Scrimm. Newly orphaned teenager Mike, his brother, and their friends face off against a mysterious grave robber known as the Tall Man. Anyone that's been around here for a while knows that Phantasm is my favorite horror movie, so this should be no surprise to anybody that has watched this for a while. I mean, I got my homage to them right here. I just think this movie is so incredible. and it's still very underrated, but it's one of the more artistic, creative, imaginative, unique horror movies, and that's the main reason I think that it still holds up so much for me. Because the lighting, the pacing, the style of it, it feels like you're in some kind of weird, fantastical dream, but yet it's still creepy and eerie, and there's genuinely scary moments in it as well, especially if you see this when you're younger. But there's just nothing I don't love about it. The score, the sound design is incredible. The acting is so much fun to see. Every character in it is fun and unique and quirky and strange. Just there's all these little weird things about it that I understand if you're a younger person seeing it for the first time may not work for you. But when you've lived with this movie your entire life, and on top of that, I have this nostalgic, soft spot for 1970s and early 80s horror on top of that. But I think even if I didn't have that nostalgic spot for this movie, I think I would still love it, because as an artist, the creativity that's on display in this is it's up there with anything creative wise that we've seen. Because this guy did it all. Don Coscarelli did every single thing involving making this movie. And yet it still really works. It works as a horror movie. Every element of it works. Yeah, it's strange and kooky, but that's what gives it charm and flavor, I think. And I cannot forget to mention Angus Scrimm, the tall man. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but that guy was amazing. And just his stature, the way he carried himself, the unique, terrifying nature of that as a horror villain, definitely one of my favorite villains ever made. So there's no doubt in my mind, my number one favorite horror movie ever made is Phantasm. So that's my list, but I would love to hear down below, what are your 10 favorite horror movies? Not what you think are the best, but like what I did here. What are your personal favorite horror movies? And even if you're a little embarrassed to admit some of them, it doesn't matter. There's no shame in that. You enjoy what you enjoy. And so definitely leave that down in the comments. And I want to give a huge, massive, enormous thank you to the Ghost Pirate crew, to you guys over on Patreon, and to the channel members over here. You guys mean so much to me. And if you would like to help support this channel over on Patreon, there's a link down in the description. Or you can become a channel member and help support the channel that way by clicking on the join button down there. But like always, thank you so much for watching. Please crush that like button. And remember, guys, horror can be fun. And if you enjoyed this, click right here to watch me talk about 10 horror movies that I highly recommend. And I'll see you guys next time.